So here's what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 12. He says, "Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me." Now, I read that and I'm like, Lord, can we avoid that, please? There's some theologians believe that it was some kind of disfigurement that Paul had that would have made him, well, insecure, weak. What are people thinking about me, kind of a thing. And there's enough clues throughout the New Testament that it could have been something like that. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. Did you ever pray for something and God answered a different way? But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." We don't like to talk about our weaknesses. We don't like to talk about the stuff that makes us nervous and gives us anxiety. And it's sort of like, somebody comes up to you, how you feeling about this? "Oh, I'm fine." You're not. We want people to think something about us that's not true. And as Dr. Baker has schooled me a bit on it, when our brain knows we're anxious and our words say we're not anxious, our brain does not like that. It actually creates more anxiety. What does that have to do with the race of faith? Well, there are components to the race of faith that, well, we don't like to move into. We're nervous. I don't know enough to be able to do that. Oh, well, what if they ask me a question and I don't know the answer to it? Oh, I just couldn't do that. Oh, I'm not very good at doing it. We use all these excuses about our weaknesses. And yet, Paul says, you know what? Here's where I'm weak. I'm going to allow God to work through me, and guess who's going to get the glory for it? It's going to be God, because it's surely not me. It's not going to be me. So let me bring Doc Baker up, and you can intro our video here briefly. And hopefully you won't confuse us. You'll be able to tell us apart, because Dr. Jeff Baker, Jeff Raker, and we're both wearing green today. And I actually have this same jacket. And so the difference really could be the boxing ear, over here, that
cauliflower ear.
So Doc Baker worked his way through school boxing here in Cincinnati, right?
Yes.
You sparred with Aaron Pryor, right?
Yeah,
if you know anything about boxing in Cincinnati, and Aaron Pryor, this very talented boxer, he beat on you a little bit.
He did.
It's kind of what that.
He was the only fighter in history to have 27 consecutive knockouts. He was very.
Were you one of them?
No.
No. Okay.
I was a weight class right underneath.
And you're thankful for that.
Class above me.
So when I started talking with Doc about this weakness thing to wrap up our series of the finish line, he suggested a video, and I want you to kind of intro the video a little bit, because the words are, it's a little hard to hear, but I want you to give the context for this video.
Okay, so here's my big picture. My big picture, if you want to consider human weakness, it all comes down to the issue of pain. I believe subconsciously human beings crave all these comic book heroes because it actually represents us before pain, the whole pre-Apple situation, okay? And I think we crave that moment, or that time when you and I had no pain. When Adam and Eve had no pain. They were superhumans. And I think we also crave these Marvel characters on TV and movies, because the only real superhuman that ever actually walked the planet was Jesus. And I think there's an unconscious aspect in every one of us that craves that person or even us when we did not have pain, because pain is our weakness. So when you study pain, as I do with my patients, the interesting thing about pain is that the pain pathway is a multi-matrix in your brain. It's very complicated. And physical pain and emotional pain is the exact same pathway, so the brain really can't tell the difference.
Our brains are sometimes pretty stupid.
It's very primitive.
Primitive.
Yes.
That's a good word.
Yes.
Caveman. Think
Yes,
caveman.
Matter of fact, the below your ear part of your brain is referred to as the reptilian brain, because it's exactly like a turtle. And it responds exactly like a turtle. So it's very primitive. So I want you to see a world-class athlete. And you'll recognize this guy. He was an amazing heavyweight champion. Okay? And I want you to see him in a very, very weak moment. Iron Mike Tyson, in a moment that very few people see, when he struggled with his pain of fear. Please play the
And it's right before a fight, right? It's right before a fight.
His 21st fight, and it shows him and Teddy. He's now coaching Teddy Atlas.
In a previous video segment, we talked about confidence and whether or not it was critical to achieve success in the ring, on the mat, in the cage. Well, you're about to see a video clip of one of history's most intimidating fighters in a very unlikely moment where he's about to fight and he's obviously very, very afraid.
Look, just relax, Michael. Relax, just relax. Just relax. Relax. Yeah, but just relax. Just relax. I know the first time. Yeah, well, just relax. All this is relax. All of this is another boxing match. You've done it already 20 times. You've done it in the gym. With better fighters than you're ever going to fight here. I mean, it's always hard, but I mean...
I can't wrong way, remember?
Yeah.
Well, Mike Tyson, anybody likes him.
Yeah, everyone likes him now. That's right, you have a reason to be proud. And you continue to do it as long as you don't let anything mess you up. As long as you don't let yourself mess you up. You continue to have people like you. Never, just always remember, that's all. Just always remember, you know, don't let your feelings get the better of you. Don't let things mix you up, that's all. Let's go get ready for a fight. Come on.
So what you notice about Mike Tyson, he's crying. And he has this tremendous fear of letting people down because he might lose. So I want you to think that one of the things that your brain does is that because the lower part of your brain is what registers all of our emotional aspects, is that your brain can't tell the difference between the risk of failure or the risk of rejection, which was what Tyson was so upset about, and the risk of physical death. That risk is risk to their brain. So the risk of dying, or the risk like a soldier or a fireman or a police officer, that risk is no different than rejection or failure.
So if my brain can't tell the difference between a charging tiger that wants to eat me,
Yes.
and this has never happened, my wife who yells at me.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, in all seriousness, she
Yeah.
has It's close, she says. But it's true.
Yes.
And so our brain makes us a little stupid at that point when there's that fear, that thing going on, whatever it is. I'm fearing rejection. I'm fearing not knowing the answer.
Well, yes, the fear of, again, I could fail or being rejected, or I don't know what's going to happen, okay?
Oh, and that'll do it too.
Yeah, can scare us. Now, we assume that fear is determined by the threat, in terms of it's a tiger or like a soldier going into battle, and that's actually not true at all. What determines the level of fear is my mental engagement of the story in my head. So, for instance, if you come to my house, which you're all invited, okay?
Excellent. All right.
Call and tell my wife. So if you come to my house and we watch Jurassic Park in my home theater, which is really cool, you will scream like a 9-year-old girl, and you will think you're going to be eaten by a dinosaur, okay? Because it will trick your mind into a level of engagement. Now, if you watch the same thing on your iPhone, you'll be interested. It's a great story, but you're really not going to experience a whole lot of fear because it doesn't engage your mind. So an athlete, I've coached world-class athletes. I coach judo. And as a judo coach and some of the Olympic athletes that I've been around and coached them, that level of fear standing in front of the entire world where you and another competitor are going to compete for the gold medal is tremendous. But again, the level of risk is not determined by the issue, by the threat. It's by the story in my head that I tell myself.
So if I tell the story, if I get up every day and I say, this is my day. I have everything I need to accomplish this, and if I repeat that story, I'm good. It's a big piece of the help.
Yes, and what this does, I want you to think of it this way. Level of engagement is determined by what I focus my attention on, because the way the brain works is whatever I focus on gets bigger. Period. So if I focus on the threat, no matter what that is, if I played high school football, so as a quarterback in high school,
you played quarterback?
Yes.
Could you see over the?
Well, I had to drop back 10 yards.
Okay.
This was so freaking tall.
Just
I dropped back 7 yards. I had to drop back 10. And then when they made a pocket, they had to kind of be far away from me. The pocket couldn't be too close, or I'd hit them right in the head with a football. So, yeah, we had to make some adjustments. But I was squirrely, so I was a good quarterback.
There you go. Okay. Okay.
Still a little squirrely. So I'm a good shrink because of that. So the level of engagement determines my focus and how much of that anxiety plays a role. Anxiety is going to show up, okay? And my coach and I always tell my kids, it's going to be butterflies. It's going to be there. But whether it determines whether I choke on it, whether it paralyzes me, determines if I focus on my feeling or the thoughts or the sensation or the urges, okay? Or do I focus on the task, the thing that's important to me? Now, if you would have watched Mike Tyson step into the ring, when he stepped through the ropes, he was on. There was no fear because his mind had completely engaged in the present moment of doing his job. And when you're involved in, let's say you got a friend, okay? And he's struggling, and you want to tell him that you believe that Christ is going to be a big part of the answer to this. And you want to say that. But it's kind of risky to do that. You could be rejected, you could fail, you could screw the whole thing up, okay? So what shows up because you're taking a risk? Anxiety, right? Uh-huh. Just like Mike Tyson. what do I focus on? Do I focus on the story in my head that I could screw up, I could fail? Do I focus on the anxiety I feel? Do I focus on the sensations in my body, which is kind of jittery and nervous and kind of cold? Do I focus on the urge to withdraw? Or do I focus on, I got an opportunity here. And all I got to do, I'm not going to talk about theology. I'm just going to tell him the story.
My story.
My own story about what it's like this week when Jesus was with me. When Jesus was with me this week, and I faced this is what happened for me. When I start telling my story and I get engaged in that, there isn't actually fear leaves. Athletes, we call it the zone. Psychologists call it flow. And when you're in flow, when you're in zone, and you're completely in the present moment, you actually don't have thoughts, you don't have fear. You're just here in the moment
just there.
because neurologically, you're completely involved in the cortical part of your brain. You're no longer in the limbic system down here.
Moved it up.
Yes, I bumped it up a level.
So to translate some of this into this race of faith, my mind goes back to, and I'll put a couple of people on the spot, but Carrie in Haiti and Jack in Haiti last year, and Jessica, to name a few. Jeff the year before when I sent a team off and wasn't there. I said, "Here, you're the team leader," and they got to church and they said, "Hey, the team leader should come up and speak." They don't always ask me to do that, so I didn't know they were going to do that. But can you relate to the anxiety and the excuse me, you want me to talk to this Haitian through a translator about Jesus?
Right.
You want me to pray with a group of kids to invite Jesus into their lives? Carrie was shaking her boots. And yet, what would you say when I asked you to do that? Because Carrie and I were in the same little group going around this village, so I don't know all the other stories. But I asked you, there was a group of kids, I don't know, probably 15 kids, and I said, "Hey, Carrie, you pray with them." What can you remember back to that? Are you feeling anxious right now just thinking about it?
Not as anxious as I did at that moment. I just wanted to have the right words because it was an important thing in the lives of these kids and in my own. So you want
Right.
to have the right words. But then I remembered something that you had said in the service that said the words don't matter. It's don't stumble on the words.
Somebody remembered something. Woo! Yes! 2 times in 30 years. Yeah. So it part of this race of faith is passing on to others the faith.
Absolutely.
And yet it terrifies Christ followers to do that. I believe the statistic is that 97%, huge, 97% of Christians, I mean, true, accepted Christ into their hearts, 97% of Christians will never lead anybody to faith in Christ. It's an astounding statistic. And it mainly is about this fear. What if I don't have the answers? What if I... How to translate a little bit for us about sharing faith in particular? What are we focusing on that's not helpful? Where can we focus? And if you can, link in all that. My strength is made perfect in your weakness.
Yes. I think in sharing our faith, we have to have a very clear idea that we're not doing what the pastor does in the morning. What we're doing is simply very rudimentally, it's just telling about my story. There's nothing you know more better than you. And what happened when you experienced Jesus, again, it's not theology, it's not I'm not trying to convince anybody. I don't ever get involved in arguments about this. I don't get involved in theology. I went to school, I went to Bible college 4 years and studied theology before I went to clinical work. So I understand theology. I just don't think it's very useful practically, honestly. I think it provided a structure for me as a Buddhist who accepted Christ. It provided a structure for me to understand what I was experiencing with this person I met. You know, when you're a Buddhist and you pray, you learn to be very non-anxious. You learn to kind of move with the world, which is all groovy and good. However, when I prayed to Jesus, somebody answered the other end of the phone, and it freaked me out. Because that never happens in Buddhist meditation, you know? So given that there was somebody else on the phone line, I needed to know who this guy was. So went to Bible college 4 years, and that was good. It provided structure for me to understand, but it still comes down to telling another human being, this is what happened with me and Jesus this week. This is how Jesus showed up for me, and simply telling my story. See, my story is unrefutable. You can't refute my story.
It's your story.
That's right. So I want to talk about what shows up when we don't get focused on that, and we get focused on rejection and the anxiety I feel, the story in my head of I'm going to screw up.
What if they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to?
Yeah, and I get those theological questions. You know, I don't know about you, but when I share this with patients or whatever, they immediately go to, well, what about nobody that's heard about Jesus dies and they're in Africa and whatever? You know, dude, really? You know? Again, and what I want you to understand is people get problem focused, not solution focused. Okay? The solution is you experiencing Jesus, not what if theology. So I want to talk about why we do that and how we get hung up. The more we struggle and get focused on problems or pain, my pain patients, so what I do in orthopedics is head and spine injuries. And when people focus on pain, whether it's emotional or physical, this is what happens. Number one, it amplifies pain. So your anxiety grows.
So if I focus on it, it's going to get bigger.
It makes it amplify and intensify. So focusing on the crazy thoughts in my head of what a loser or how I'm going to screw this up, I'll simply make it bigger. Number two, I'll also bring in other negative emotions. Other negative emotions are going to come right in along with anxiety.
When I start feeling anxious about sharing my faith, I'm going to remember that in 5th grade, I did something stupid, and it was very embarrassing. And all of a sudden, I start to feel embarrassed about this thing from 5th grade that nobody else remembers.
Yeah. I looked at a Playboy Bunny picture of a girl in my buddy's Foot Locker, Corky Reed. Corky's not here. Okay, it was in your Foot Locker, and he showed it to me, and so who am I to talk about Jesus? Because I'm such a sinner, right?
So as soon as we begin thinking about all of that,
all my negative stuff, I open the door for that. The other thing is the brain is meant to process things very quickly. Okay. Thoughts, feelings, emotions. Thoughts, feelings, emotions. Thoughts, it does it very quickly. The Pentium processor in our mind, the thalamus, is like a Pentium 10,000. Okay? But when I focus on negative thoughts and feelings, what I do is I get stuck there. And do you notice when you do that, it's like a little squirrel cage in your brain, right?
Oh, and you feel the pit in your stomach, and it messes with you physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally.
You can be there all day stuck there, rather than what your brain is naturally designed to do, which is kind of flow from one thing to the other. So when you get focused on anxiety and all those crazy thoughts, it can be there hours and hours and hours like a little squirrel cage. The other thing you do is called neurobiological flooding, where you get so freaked out, you push your pulse above 100, and now you kind of go a little crazy. Okay? Because you lose contact with your reason. You lose contact with the cortical part of your brain because you start flooding with stress hormones.
Probably a husband should not say you've lost contact with reason.
Well,
This might not.
not in the moment.
Might not. Okay, not in the moment.
Later,
Okay, all right.
in a very
all right.
warm,
I'm
loving,
just.
caring way, but not in the moment.
So
Yeah.
when Paul writes that I'm going to boast in my weakness, because in my weakness I find God's strength. He's obviously not suggesting focus on my weakness.
No, it's just part of the equation. That what I got to believe is that my weakness is my anxiety. This post-Apple condition that I have. Okay, it's just going to be
post-Apple Garden of Eden, not post-Apple.
No,
okay, okay.
The whole Apple thing, Adam and Eve. So
right.
this post-Apple condition I have of the fear and anxiety is going to be part of my experience when I share my faith or when I take risks or when I'm an athlete and I'm going to compete. Confidence as an athlete is a behavior, not a feeling. It's because I'm willing to do it, not because I don't feel fear.
So what we saw Tyson doing was letting that out.
Yes.
No, I'm fine.
Right.
It was, oh my word, I am really anxious about this. So I'm going to embrace this weakness because it's already there. It's already part of who I am. I can be okay with that, especially as a Christian.
Yes. Because
where I'm weak, God gets to display his strength.
Yes.
And I'm just an instrument.
Yes.
I'm just, it's not about me, and we make it about us.
I think we assume that in Bible times, when people acted in faith, that they felt comfortable and confident doing that. And that's not what I read. I read that they were scared to death. They had all kinds of negative thoughts and feelings. It's just that they were willing. To me, that's what world athletes do. I believe faith has nothing to do with feelings. And I believe top-level athletes, confidence is a behavior, not a comfortable feeling.
So when I'm a Christian seeking to live out my faith at work where maybe I'm afraid people would laugh at me, or maybe it's even I give in to participation in something that I'm not comfortable with, but I'm not going to risk that. This is all part of what's going on. So the behavior of, you know what, I'm going to take the stand. I'm gonna draw my own personal line in the sand, if you will.
Yes.
This is kind of what we're talking about.
Yes.
That I'm gonna behave in a way, and the feelings are gonna eventually catch up. Although, well, actually, they may not. This was his 21st fight.
Right.
He's still feeling this thing.
I think he had that every single fight. And most athletes I know are like that before competition. But once they're in the competition, they're in the moment.
Once they let it start
Just
going.
Like once you start telling your story about your experience with Jesus, then you're in a zone. You're in the present here and now. The biggest thing that kills an athlete or kills our Christian ability to share what we experience with Christ is when we get in our head, and that happens three ways. The number one thing that people do in their heads is they get involved in all these failures, and they assume that if I just wrestle with them, somehow I can cleanse myself and be good enough to do that. And obviously, the more you do that, the worse it goes. But the assumption is if I'm judgmental enough with me,
about
and
myself,
all my failures, and if I'm just critical enough, that somehow I'm going to perfect myself and therefore be okay to take these risks. The other thing we do, which is called worry, is just we what if things to death. You know, we what if things to death, hoping that somehow we're going to come up with the perfect plan that won't fail, therefore not have to take a risk. There is no such thing. It's always a risk. It can always fail. But we what if and what if and what if, and therefore then never ever do it because we can't come up with the perfect plan.